What happens when a late-night talk show goes from friendly banter to a full-blown confrontation in front of millions of viewers? Tonight, we're breaking down one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history, when Blake Shelton appeared on The Tonight Show and things went completely off the rails. Before we get into this absolutely wild story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what happened. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds, because what started as a typical celebrity interview turned into something nobody saw coming. So let's set the scene. Blake Shelton walks out onto the Tonight Show stage, waving to the crowd with that signature country boy charm he's known for. The audience is going absolutely crazy. Everyone's excited to see him. And Jimmy Fallon is doing his usual enthusiastic host routine, shaking Blake's hand and giving him that big welcome. Everything seems perfectly normal at first. They sit down. Jimmy starts with some light conversation about Blake's latest music, asking about tour dates and new projects. Blake is relaxed, leaning back in his chair, laughing at Jimmy's jokes. The energy in the studio feels good, friendly, exactly what you'd expect from a Tonight Show appearance. Jimmy asks Blake about his experience on The Voice, and Blake launches into this funny story about one of his contestants who kept forgetting the lyrics during rehearsals. The audience is laughing, Jimmy's cracking up, and Blake is in his element, telling the story with perfect comedic timing. He talks about how he had to write the lyrics on giant cue cards and hold them up during practice sessions. It's all very light, very entertaining. Jimmy asks if Blake ever gets tired of doing the show after so many seasons, and Blake responds with something genuine, saying he loves discovering new talent and that every season brings something different. Then, Jimmy transitions to asking about Blake's personal life, which is pretty standard for these interviews. He asks how Blake balances his music career with everything else going on. And Blake gives a thoughtful answer about time management and prioritizing what matters most. The conversation feels natural, flowing from topic to topic, the way these interviews always do. Jimmy brings up Blake's love for Oklahoma, and Blake starts talking about his ranch, describing the peaceful life he has there when he's not touring or filming. He talks about fishing, spending time outdoors, and how important it is for him to have that escape from the chaos of the entertainment industry. But then something shifts in Jimmy's demeanor. You can see it in his face, this subtle change in expression. He leans forward slightly, and his voice takes on a different tone, more serious, more pointed. He says, "Blake, I want to ask you about something that's been circulating online. There have been some accusations, some serious claims about your behavior at a recent industry event." Blake's smile fades immediately. His whole body language changes. He sits up straighter, his eyes narrow, and you can feel the tension suddenly filling the studio. The audience goes quiet. Sensing that something unexpected is happening, Blake asks Jimmy what he's talking about, and his voice has an edge to it now, defensive. Jimmy continues, saying that multiple sources have reported that Blake was involved in an altercation backstage at an awards show, that he allegedly became aggressive with staff members and caused a scene. Blake's face flushes red. He looks directly at Jimmy and says, "Are you serious right now? Are you actually doing this on your show?" Jimmy responds that he's just asking about what's been reported, that it's his job as a journalist to address these things when a guest is sitting in front of him. Blake shakes his head, clearly angry now. He tells Jimmy that what he's describing never happened, that it's completely fabricated, and that he can't believe Jimmy would ambush him with something like this on live television. Jimmy insists he's not ambushing anyone, that he's simply asking Blake to address the allegations. Blake fires back, saying there's a difference between asking a question and making an accusation, and that Jimmy crossed a line. The atmosphere in the studio is electric now, uncomfortable. You can hear nervous murmurs from the audience, and the camera operators are clearly unsure where to point their cameras. Jimmy tries to maintain his professional composure, saying that Blake is welcome to tell his side of the story. That's why he brought it up. Blake leans forward, pointing at Jimmy, and says, "My side of the story? There is no story. Jimmy, someone made something up. It spread online like everything else does, and now you're sitting here acting like it's legitimate news." Jimmy responds that several people came forward, that it wasn't just one random claim. Blake's voice gets louder. He says, "Several people? Who are these people? Did you verify anything before you decided to bring this up? Did you do any actual journalism, or did you just see something trending and decide to use it for ratings?" The accusation stings. You can see Jimmy's face react to being called out like that. He tells Blake that his team did look into it, that there were credible sources, but Blake cuts him off. Credible sources. What does that even mean anymore? Someone tweets something, someone else retweets it, and suddenly it's credible. That's not how this works, Jimmy. That's not how any of this should work. Jimmy tries to steer the conversation, suggesting they take a breath and talk through this calmly, but Blake is having none of it. He tells Jimmy that there's nothing to talk through, that Jimmy made a choice to bring up false allegations on national television, and that choice has consequences. The audience is completely silent now. This isn't entertainment anymore. This is a real confrontation happening in real time. Jimmy asks Blake why he's getting so defensive if nothing happened, and that question makes Blake explode. Defensive? You ambush me with lies, and I'm defensive. How else am I supposed to react, Jimmy? Should I just smile and play along while you damage my reputation? Blake's voice is shaking with anger now. He talks about how hard he's worked to build his career, how much he values his relationships with people in the industry, and how allegations like this, even when false, can destroy years of trust and goodwill. Jimmy tries to apologize, saying that wasn't his intention, but Blake interrupts him again. Your intention doesn't matter, the damage is done. Right now, people watching this are wondering if there's truth to what you said. Even though I'm sitting here telling you it's false, there will always be people who assume something happened. That's what accusations do, Jimmy. They stick. They follow you. And you just threw one at me in front of millions of people. The raw emotion in Blake's voice is palpable. This isn't a performance. This is genuine anger and hurt. Jimmy looks visibly shaken. He says, Blake, I apologize if I handled this wrong, but I was trying to give you an opportunity to address it. Blake laughs bitterly. An opportunity. You call blindsiding someone an opportunity. If you wanted to give me an opportunity, you would have called my team before the show, asked if I wanted to address it, and let me make that choice. Instead, you put me on the spot because you thought it would make good television. Jimmy opens his mouth to respond, but Blake keeps going, his frustration pouring out now. You know what the worst part is? I came here tonight because I thought we had a good relationship. I've been on your show how many times? We've laughed together, shared stories, supported each other's work. And you throw that away for what? A viral moment. Blake's voice cracks slightly, and you can tell this betrayal cuts deep for him. The personal nature of it, the fact that it's coming from someone he considered friendly, makes it so much worse than if it had come from a random reporter or tabloid journalist. Jimmy finally gets a word in, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. Blake, I understand you're upset, and I take responsibility for how this went down. But you have to understand, when these stories circulate, when people are talking about them, we have to address them. That's the nature of being in the public eye. Blake shakes his head vigorously. No, Jimmy, that's not the nature of anything. That's a choice. You chose to bring this up. You chose to treat rumors as if they deserved airtime. There are 1,000 things you could have asked me tonight, and you chose the one thing that was designed to put me in an impossible position. The tension is suffocating now. Members of the audience are shifting in their seats, unsure if they should react at all. The band is silent, the usual energy of the show completely drained. Jimmy runs his hand through his hair, clearly stressed. He tells Blake that he's sorry, that maybe he should have approached it differently, but that he can't just ignore things that are being widely discussed. Blake leans back in his chair, his anger still simmering, but now mixed with something else. Disappointment, maybe, or exhaustion. You can ignore them, Jimmy. You absolutely can. Not everything that trends online deserves attention. Not every accusation deserves a platform. Sometimes the responsible thing to do is nothing at all. Jimmy argues that remaining silent can look like complicity, that if he doesn't ask about controversial topics, then he's not doing his job properly. Blake's eyes flash with renewed anger. Your job is to entertain people, to have conversations with guests, to make people laugh. Your job is not to play prosecutor. You're not here to interrogate me about false allegations. If you wanted to be an investigative journalist, you should have become one, but you didn't. You became a late-night host, and late-night hosts are supposed to make their guests feel welcome, not attacked. The word attacked hangs in the air. Jimmy looks hurt by it, telling Blake that he never intended to make him feel attacked, that this whole thing has been a misunderstanding. Blake responds immediately, saying there's no misunderstanding. that Jimmy knew exactly what he was doing when he brought this up, and that trying to walk it back now doesn't change what happened. Jimmy insists that he genuinely thought he was doing the right thing, giving Blake a chance to clear the air. But Blake counters that you don't clear the air by spreading the dirt in the first place. Jimmy asks what Blake would have wanted him to do instead. Blake pauses, taking a breath, trying to compose himself. He explains that if Jimmy had concerns or questions about the allegations, the professional thing would have been to reach out, privately, to ask Blake's team about it, to get the facts before ever mentioning it publicly. He says that responsible journalism, even in entertainment, requires verification and context, not just repeating whatever is trending on social media. Jimmy nods slowly, and you can tell he's starting to understand the gravity of his mistake, but the damage is already done. Blake continues, his voice steadier now, but still firm. You have a platform, Jimmy, a huge platform. Millions of people watch this show. When you say something, when you ask a question, it carries weight. It shapes how people think about things, about people. You used that platform tonight to legitimize a false story, and that's something I can't just laugh off. That's not something we can joke our way past. This is my life, my career, my reputation. These things matter to me, and they should matter to you too. Jimmy tells Blake that they do matter to him, that he takes his responsibility seriously, but Blake cuts him off. If you took it seriously, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If you took it seriously, you would have done your homework before putting me on the spot. You would have known that the allegations were baseless, that there were no credible witnesses, that the entire story fell apart under any kind of scrutiny. But you didn't do that homework, did you? You just saw an opportunity for a dramatic moment, and you took it. The accusation stings because there's truth in it. You can see Jimmy struggling with how to respond, knowing that Blake is right, that the decision to bring up the allegations was driven more by the potential for a compelling television moment than by any journalistic necessity. Jimmy admits that he could have handled it better, that he should have been more careful, but Blake isn't ready to accept the apology yet. Handling it better would have been not bringing it up at all. Jimmy, that was the right move, and you didn't make it. Jimmy asks Blake if there's any way to move forward from this, if they can find a way to repair the damage. Blake looks at him for a long moment, and you can see him wrestling with his emotions. He says, I don't know, Jimmy. I really don't know. You broke trust tonight, and trust isn't something you can just fix with an apology. It takes time. It takes consistent action. It takes proving that you understand what you did wrong and that you won't do it again. Can you do that? Are you willing to actually learn from this? Jimmy nods emphatically, saying that he wants to make this right. Blake responds that making it right starts with acknowledging publicly, not just to him, but to everyone watching, that he made a mistake, that the allegations were unfounded, and that he should never have brought them up. Jimmy takes a breath and turns slightly toward the camera. He says, I want to be clear with everyone watching. I made a mistake tonight. I brought up allegations against Blake without properly verifying them, and I put him in an unfair position. That was wrong, and I apologize not just to Blake, but to all of you for falling short of the standards this show should uphold. Blake nods slightly, acknowledging the apology, but his expression remains serious. He tells Jimmy that words are important, but actions matter more. He says that Jimmy needs to think carefully about how he approaches sensitive topics in the future, that having a platform comes with responsibility, and that responsibility means sometimes choosing not to pursue a story, even if it might generate attention. Jimmy agrees, promising to do better, to be more thoughtful about the impact of his questions and the way he frames difficult topics. The conversation has shifted now, from confrontation to something more like a difficult but necessary dialogue. Blake talks about how exhausting it is to constantly defend yourself against false accusations, how the internet has made it so easy for lies to spread faster than truth, and how people in the media have a responsibility to slow that process down rather than accelerate it. He describes the emotional toll of seeing your name attached to things you didn't do, of having to explain to family and friends that no, that story isn't true, and wondering if people actually believe you or if they're just being polite. Jimmy listens, really listens, and you can see the weight of what Blake is saying sinking in. He talks about his own experiences with false stories, admitting that he's been on the receiving end of rumors and lies, and that he should have been more empathetic to what Blake was going through. He says that sometimes when you're in the host chair, focused on keeping the show moving and hitting certain beats, you lose sight of the human being sitting across from you, and that happened tonight. Blake appreciates the honesty, telling Jimmy that at least they're having a real conversation now, which is more than what usually happens when these situations occur. Blake explains that in most cases, when something like this happens on a talk show, everyone just moves on, pretends it didn't occur, and the guest is left to deal with the aftermath alone. He says that's part of why he got so angry, because he's tired of that pattern, tired of being expected to just smile through attacks on his character. Jimmy asks what Blake wants to see change, not just in this moment, but more broadly in how the media handles these situations. Blake thinks for a moment before answering, saying that he wants to see more accountability, more willingness to admit mistakes, and more emphasis on truth over entertainment value. Blake elaborates on his point, saying that entertainment shouldn't come at the expense of someone's dignity or reputation. He talks about how the line between news and entertainment has become so blurred that nobody seems to know where one ends and the other begins anymore. He tells Jimmy that talk shows used to be places where celebrities could relax, have fun, promote their work, and connect with audiences in a positive way. Now they've become minefields where you never know when someone might try to catch you off guard with something designed to create controversy rather than conversation. Jimmy acknowledges that the landscape has changed, that there's pressure to create viral moments, to generate clips that will spread across social media and drive viewership, but he admits that chasing those moments at the expense of treating guests with respect is a losing game. Blake agrees, adding that the irony is that this moment, this confrontation, is probably going to be the most talked about segment of the night. Maybe of the whole week, but not for the reasons anyone would want. It's going to be remembered as an example of what not to do, of how an interview can go completely wrong when the host prioritizes drama over decency. The conversation turns to the broader implications of what happened. Blake points out that when someone with Jimmy's platform repeats an allegation, even in the form of a question, it gives that allegation credibility it might not deserve. People watching at home don't necessarily know the context, don't know that the story was fabricated or exaggerated. They just hear a respected host asking about it and assume there must be some truth to it. That's the danger, Blake explains. That's why this matters so much. It's not just about him being uncomfortable or angry. It's about the ripple effects of careless journalism. Even in entertainment formats, Jimmy asks Blake how he thinks media figures should handle situations where allegations exist but haven't been verified. Blake's answer is straightforward, saying that if something hasn't been verified, if there's no solid evidence, if credible sources haven't confirmed it, then it shouldn't be reported or discussed as if it's legitimate. He says that erring on the side of caution, of protecting someone's reputation until proven otherwise, should be the default position. Jimmy counters that sometimes waiting for complete verification means stories never get told, that sources can be intimidated or silenced. Blake responds that there's a difference between investigating something privately and broadcasting it publicly before you have the facts. The discussion becomes more philosophical as they both grapple with these difficult questions about responsibility, truth, and the role of media in shaping public perception. Blake talks about how he's watched careers get destroyed by false allegations, how even when people are eventually cleared, the stain remains, the association lingers. He mentions several examples of people in the industry who were accused of things they didn't do, and how years later, despite being exonerated, they're still defined by those accusations in some people's minds. That's what terrifies him, he admits, not just what happened tonight, but what it represents. The willingness to sacrifice someone's reputation for a moment of heightened drama. Jimmy brings up the point that Blake's strong reaction tonight, while justified, might also contribute to the story spreading further. Blake acknowledges this, saying it's an impossible situation. If you don't defend yourself, people assume guilt. If you do defend yourself, especially with anger or emotion, people question why you're being so defensive. There's no winning move when you're dealing with false accusations. The best you can hope for is to be clear, to be honest, and to trust that at least some people will see through the noise and recognize the truth. He says that's why he couldn't just sit there and deflect or joke his way past what Jimmy brought up, because doing so would have been a tacit acceptance of the premise that there was something to address. Jimmy reflects on his role in all of this, saying that he's realizing how much power he has in shaping narratives and how that power needs to be wielded more carefully. He talks about the responsibility of being a gatekeeper, someone who decides what gets amplified and what gets ignored. Blake tells him that recognizing that responsibility is the first step, but following through on it consistently is what really matters. It's easy to make promises in a moment of crisis, Blake says, but the real test is whether those promises translate into changed behavior over time. The energy in the studio has shifted from hostile to heavy. There's a sense that something important is being worked through here, something beyond just this one incident. Blake talks about hoping that their conversation might serve as a wake-up call, not just for Jimmy, but for others in similar positions, to think more carefully about the impact of their words and the questions they choose to ask. He says he doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who had a meltdown on The Tonight Show, but if that's what happens, he at least wants the context to be clear, wants people to understand why he reacted the way he did. Jimmy assures Blake that the full context will be available, that they're not going to edit this conversation down to just the heated moments, that viewers will be able to see the entire exchange and draw their own conclusions. Blake appreciates that, saying transparency is important, that trying to hide or minimize what happened would only make things worse. He tells Jimmy that he hopes they can both learn from this, that maybe something good can come out of something that felt awful in the moment. Jimmy agrees, saying he's committed to doing better, to thinking more critically about how he approaches sensitive topics, and to prioritizing the well-being of his guests over the pursuit of dramatic television. Blake asks Jimmy if he understands now why this mattered so much, why he couldn't just let it slide. Jimmy says he does, that hearing Blake articulate the deeper implications of what seemed like a simple question has opened his eyes to the weight of responsibility he carries. Blake tells him that every person with a microphone, with a camera, with an audience, carries that weight whether they want to or not. The question is whether you acknowledge it and act accordingly, or whether you pretend it doesn't exist until something like this happens and forces you to confront it. They sit in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling over both of them. Jimmy asks Blake if he's willing to continue his relationship with the show, if he'd ever come back after what happened tonight. Blake doesn't answer immediately. He says it depends on whether he believes the changes Jimmy is promising will actually happen. He tells Jimmy that trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild, but not impossible. It requires consistency, honesty, and a genuine commitment to doing things differently. If Jimmy can demonstrate those qualities moving forward, Blake says he'd be open to giving him another chance. But that chance would come with the understanding that there can't be another incident like this. Jimmy thanks Blake for even being willing to consider it, acknowledging that Blake would be well within his rights to never work with him or the show again. Blake responds that holding grudges doesn't help anyone, that he'd rather see growth and change than simply write someone off. But that willingness to give second chances, he emphasizes, shouldn't be mistaken for weakness or an invitation to repeat the same mistakes. Jimmy promises that won't happen, that this conversation has fundamentally changed how he thinks about his role as a host and the responsibility that comes with it. Blake stands up from his chair, and for a moment it's unclear if he's about to walk off the set. Instead, he extends his hand to Jimmy. Jimmy stands as well and shakes it, and there's something powerful in that gesture. An acknowledgement that despite everything that just happened, they're both trying to do the right thing moving forward. The audience, which has been silent for so long, begins to applaud, tentatively at first, and then more strongly. It's not the usual enthusiastic applause of a talk show, it's something different. An appreciation for the rawness and honesty of what they just witnessed. Blake turns to the audience and gives a slight nod, acknowledging them. He tells Jimmy that he hopes this conversation helps other people too. People who've been in similar situations or who will find themselves there in the future. He hopes it shows that it's okay to stand up for yourself, to demand better, to refuse to accept being treated unfairly, even when there's pressure to just go along with it. Jimmy echoes that sentiment, saying he hopes other hosts and media figures will watch this and think more carefully about their own practices, their own choices, and the impact they have on the people they're supposed to be serving through their work. Blake finally sits back down, and Jimmy asks if they can talk about something positive before the segment ends, something that reminds everyone why Blake came on the show in the first place. Blake agrees, visibly relaxing slightly, and they spend a few minutes discussing Blake's upcoming projects, his music, and the things that bring him joy. The conversation is still more subdued than a typical talk show exchange, but there's a sense of resolution, of having worked through something difficult and come out the other side with greater understanding. The segment ends not with the usual banter and laughter, but with a mutual respect that feels earned rather than performed.